I've been told that a lot of my movies take place in the suburbs, and therefore I must have some sort of strange Jones for the suburbs. I am a child of the suburbs. That's the way I grew up in the 50s. It's the way Spielberg grew up. It's the way Ron Howard grew up. It's a lot of people who have suburbs in their movies. It's because that's what they know. And also, you know, as David Lynch has proved, the suburbs are a wonderful stomping ground for looking for the rot within. It all looks nice on the outside, but inside there's, you know, you go down underneath the grass and there's insects battling each other gorily, and there's always something going on behind the scenes. And I think that's probably true of most of life. The script came to me from Imagine Pictures, which was their first production, co-produced with Universal, and it was titled Bay Window by Dana Olson, and they were under the impression that it was a Hitchcock parody, which, you know, I didn't necessarily see that in it. Well, Rear Window, I think, was the template that they thought, well, it's called Bay Window, and it's a parody of Rear Window, and it's about a guy who sees a murder out of it. Well, but that's a whole different prospect. This is not about a guy who sees a murder. This is about a guy who thinks that the neighbors are doing something bad, which is, you know, vaguely similar, but not exactly Hitchcockian. The interesting thing was that in doing my research for the movie and just talking to people, there were a lot of people who said that there was a strange family in their neighborhood, that everybody thought that the people in that house up the street there, they're up to some strange stuff.
What is it? It's my neighbor.
The previous idea was to shoot the picture in someplace like Arizona, in a real location. And as soon as I read it, I realized that the only way this picture was going to work was if it looked like a movie, if it was stylized. I thought it should be shot on the backlot. And Universal at the time had a terrific backlot, composed primarily of houses from different eras that had been moved up the hill when the Amblin Company took over their big residential backlot. So you had all these strange period houses next to each other. The Munsters house, you know, is next to the house from Seven Gables, next to the house from Harvey. Across the street is the house from Marcus Welby AD and Leave It to Beaver. And all of these little polyglot designs made for a rather odd neighborhood. But it was very nicely landscaped and easy to work in. And the mansion, which had been used for many years, was up the hill. And what we did is our designer, James Spencer, decided to build another house at the end of the street and repave it and make it into a cul-de-sac, so that the entire movie took place in this one spot, which was a little daunting because, you know, you worry, is it going to get so visually similar that people are going to get bored with it. The area in which the Burbs is shot is recognizably the same as used for the show Desperate Housewives, where they made a couple of cosmetic changes to some of the houses. The Carlotta house, of course, we blew up, so that's not there anymore. But it's obviously the same house, and they really haven't done that much to it. They've prettied it up a bit.
You mean here? I cannot believe you did that. I cannot believe it.
One of the things when you make a movie at Universal is that you have to be aware that the tour, which brings in lots and lots of money, is much more important to the studio than any given movie that is being made. And so you literally have to stop when the tour comes by and you know, wait for them to, and they go away. And there are some people who said you can hear the screams from the Jaws ride somewhere in our picture. The guy goes, help, help, help. And it's somewhere, you know, in some scene, it's in the background. I wouldn't be surprised. For years, the Universal used to simply drive the trams right through the shots off camera and then loop the actors. The actors would never stop. I remember my first visit to the Universal Studios, I took the tour, and they were doing an episode of Sheriff Lobo with Claude Akins, and they were this close to the actors, and the actors were shooting, and the camera was on, and they were talking, and we just drove right by, and the guys were, oh, that's Sheriff Lobo. And I realized that was why so many of the TV shows that I was watching had this disembodied voice quality, because everything was looped. It all sounded the same. Everybody was always exactly as close to the mic. And it's really not a very attractive sound. Because there was a writer's strike at the time, there was almost nothing shooting in Hollywood, and everybody was really happy to have the job. And because we didn't have the ability to have the writer rewriting, he was there, but he couldn't work as a writer. I hired him as an actor so that he could, I could surreptitiously ask him stuff. But we decided to shoot it in sequence so that if we had a very gifted cast and they were all very clever and funny, and if they wanted to improv something, if they wanted to take a scene in a different way, we could build on that into the story so that the story would still make sense, as opposed to many improvs in movies that go off the topic and they somehow, in the finished movies, seem superfluous or misleading.
Now they can never accuse us of being rude or unfriendly because you've taken the initiative. I mean, even if they didn't actually come to the door itself.
Thank you, Carol.
You come in with a lot of ideas in your head, of course, and but when you see the actors on the set and you start to block the scenes, very often they'll do it in a completely different manner than the way that you imagined it in your head, and you just go with the best version of what they're doing. So because it was so loose, we had a lot of freedom to make up stuff, that much of which didn't even get into the movie.
Carol, you know what Art said to me today? Honey, did you hear what Art said today? Carol?
Yes, honey. What?
He said they have bars on their basement windows because they're turning it into a dungeon.
Oh, that's good, dear.
Dungeon.
It made it a lot more fun to make, and because we had a lot of gifted people, it was a joy going to work every morning, because you just never literally knew what exactly was going to happen. But I wasn't aware of adapting my style at all to any particular aspect of the picture. I just shoot the scenes the way I think they should be shot.
This is Walter.
Tom Hanks was everybody's first choice for the part, and Tom was a little reluctant because he didn't want to have a kid. He didn't want to play a father. He felt that, you know, he was still a leading man and he still wanted to do romantic comedies, and he thought that by playing a guy with a kid, he'd be sort of moving into an area that he wasn't really ready to go.
Art's throwing garbage all over the street.
Your mom and I are having a conversation. If you... What?
all during prep. You say, do we still have the kid? I mean, we could, he doesn't really need to have a kid. Carrie Fisher, of course, is, you know, a very funny and even brilliant person who made up a ton of her dialogue. I mean, so many exchanges in the movie were improvs that Tom and Carrie did.
I'm acting like a guy who's on vacation.
This is
See?
not someone
I
who's on
sleep
vacation.
late.
Get a tan, then.
Oh, get a tan. How am I supposed to get in my pajamas?
Bruce Dern, of course, is a joy to work with, and such a pro, and so conversant with the history of movies, and so social. I mean, he would do football pools for the crew, and everybody loved him. The part of Art, the nosy neighbor, was lobbied for by many comedians at the time who really coveted the role. But none of them seemed right until we ran into Rick Dukeman, who was not a particularly well-known guy, but was a stand-up comic and had a kind of an acerbic act. He and Tom didn't really hit it off all that well. There was a little tension between them, and it seeped out into the movie, and it actually makes the movie much funnier because there is this little edge to their relationship.
Come on, if it's all suddenly such a big deal, let's just
It's a
say
joke.
hello.
He was probably the least known member of the cast, but I think that he was really pivotal to making the picture work. And then, of course, we have the villains. You know, I had worked with Henry Gibson on Inner Space, and I thought he would be perfect for the Doctor, who seems like a milquetoast but is very sinister.
Ah, we have guests.
Corey Feldman was friends with Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson had a chimp called Bubbles, and for whatever reason, Corey was tasked with, I guess, looking out for the chimp for a while Michael was away. And so the chimp was kept in Corey's dressing room and didn't like it and pooped all over everything.
God damn it.
Serial flatulence.
I've been noticing a weird kind of odor.
It was quite a scandal because everyone was very upset about it. Bubbles didn't seem to care, but Corey was severely reprimanded. Corey was undergoing some problems at the time, and the kind of problems that later they make you call everybody back and apologize for. And I mean, he's good in the movie, but he was verging on undirectable. He just was busy with other stimulants.
Wow.
That was one area of the movie that was a little stressful, but that was the only thing. Everything else went pretty well.
God, I love this street.
I've never been afraid to break the fourth wall. I grew up on Warner Brothers cartoons and Hope and Crosby movies, and you know, I think going to the movies is a wonderful thing, and I don't think people resent being reminded that they're watching a movie, because they're watching a movie. I mean, they're either at home or they're in a theater. I mean, they're physically not in the movie. And so when people turn and talk to you, and the feedback I always get from the studio is it takes you out of the movie, which is ridiculous because you're never in the movie. You're always watching the movie. And so if you become complicit with the filmmakers because they're speaking to you, it just, I think, brings you further into the movie.
Hey, you didn't have the sea and ice stick around here, did you?
Well, the opening shot of the Burbs is one of those shots that starts with the studio logo, which of course is a globe, and then goes into the globe and goes down into the neighborhood. ILM did that shot for us, and it's pre-CGI. It's all done with mats and stuff. And I admit, I stole it from a Bob Clampett cartoon. I think there's now a phrase for it. It's called cosmic zoom, and it's been done many, many times since. When you do it at the beginning and you zoom out at the end, you sort of place your movie in the microcosm that it exists. And I admit that I stole that idea from a movie called Horror Express, which is a Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee science fiction movie, in which at the end of the movie they completely pull back and show the Earth from another planet, which just makes sense within the movie and also gives it a certain gravitas that I found, very attractive.
I'm sorry, Mr.
It was a
Peterson.
joke!
It was a joke.
Hey, I'm gonna go do something productive. I'm gonna go watch television.
The use of clips in my movies is, it's pretty endemic. I've been doing it since the very first movie I did, and it's sort of a way of positioning the movie where it is in time, in the great firmament of the movies that came before and the movies that are going to come after. I grew up in the John Frankenheimer world of a proliferation of TV screens in frames of movies, and it's been that way in my life. And now, of course, it was prescient in that now everywhere we go there are screens. There are people staring at screens 24 hours a day, no matter where they are. They're on the subway, they're in the car, they're anywhere. I mean, there are screens all over the place. When you get Jerry Goldsmith on a movie, the good thing is that you know that no matter what it looks like in rough cut, it's going to be better when it's finished. And Jerry now, by this time, was so established, and that he could actually quote from himself as a joke. And so the Bruce Dern character is a militarist, and when he's got them off on these silly maneuvers, it was funny to reprise the Patton music. The one thing that Jerry was not quite with was the use of Ennio Morricone music during the scene where the guys walk up to the house. which was intended to be presented like an Italian Western. And we had this temp music in there. And we tried to get Jerry to, and Jerry does great Western music, don't get me wrong. I mean, he does great Western scores, but they didn't have the flavor of the original European scores from Morricone.
Let's go.
And so we ended up, after he tried valiantly several times to redo this cue, and it was fine, but it was never as funny as it was with the original Morricone music. And luckily, Universal had released the picture that came from. It was called My Name is Nobody. And so we were able to get the rights to use that piece of music in that scene.
Let's go.
The twist was always going to be that after the Tom Hanks character makes his impassioned statement about how xenophobic everybody is being,
We're the lunatics! Us! It's not them!
that the twist is, of course, that in fact they really are bad. And that was always there. It was always there in the first script. In the first script, they take him away in the ambulance and presumably to kill him. And when Universal cast Tom Hanks, they said, we can't kill Tom Hanks, so you have to explain what the Klopeks are doing in their basement. Now, there was no attention given whatsoever at any point to exactly describing what it was that they were doing down there. It was just a lot of strange lights and weird stuff and, bones, and you weren't really ever supposed to know. So we had to come up with an excuse for what they were doing, and that led to shooting 3 endings. In the original ending, there's a long speech given by Mr. Klopek, Dr. Klopek, about how difficult it is for people to fit into neighborhoods when they're weird, and that when they lived in LA, nobody said anything. And
You make 1 or 2 human sacrifices. Then when you walk down the street, everybody says, oh, there goes the weirdo.
That didn't play at the preview, and so we went back and shot these other 2 endings, one of which was the one that's in the movie. And the other is they open up the trunk and there are cheerleaders in the trunk, because at the time there was a big news story about the Chowchilla kidnappings of these cheerleaders who had been kidnapped in a school bus. And then in another version, it's the garbage men, Bob Picardo and Dick Miller, who are in the trunk. I think the one in the movie is probably fine. I mean, I like the one with the garbage men because it had the garbage men, and I like those guys. But I think the ending's fine. Up until Small Soldiers, where there were a lot of problems with the ending, that I pretty much got to make the movies the way I wanted through my entire career. I can look at all of them, and for whatever their flaws are, I can say, well, that's my fault because that was my idea. So I was pretty lucky. In the studio system at the time as it existed, I'm not so sure today that would be the case. I don't think anybody has that kind of control anymore.
This is what I need, Carol. I need this.
My motto has always been to try to only make movies that I would go see. And so therefore, I feel that the movies that I was lucky enough to be able to do, I was in a position to contribute something. So I see myself in those movies, and I see the things that I like. I see the actors that I like. I see the kind of humor that I like. I see the politics that I like. I mean, they're my movies,
Tom Hanks.
I think we are overreacting.
No. The Burbs. It's one hell of a neighborhood.
Hey, honey, I think we should move.
When it was released, it was a popular movie because Tom Hanks was just coming off of Big. He left our picture to go to the premiere of Big, I remember. And that was a huge picture. And his presence, I think, elevated the movie to the point where it was commercially successful, but it got the worst reviews of any movie that I had ever done, or almost any movie I'd ever read. The funny thing was that over the years, I would go to the dentist, I'd go to the doctor's office, and somebody, oh, you did The Burbs. Oh, I love that picture. It's such a funny movie. We watch it all the time. Once again, the advent of home video comes to the rescue, a movie that was, probably, destined to be kind of forgotten. Over the years, it has built up quite an amazing cult following, to the point where people can shout the dialogue out. They have parties, and there's a book, there's a Burbs trivia book, literally, where it's all trivia about the Burbs. And their website's devoted to it, and it's just become this sort of iconic movie, which is kind of odd because, for a couple of years after it came out, it was just sort of like, it's just another movie I made. But now it seems to have snowballed into this fan favorite, and not just in America, but all over the world.